Alright mate, how you doing? Welcome back to another episode of IMO, and in today's video we're going to talk about Brexit. That's the UK's decision to leave the European Union and how it's going to affect football and in particularly the Premier League. Let's go! Now first things first, before we crack on with the rest of the video, the first thing I should do is explain exactly what the EU referendum was and what Brexit means, because some of you might not be aware or might not know about it. Essentially, last week there was a vote in the UK where the people of the UK decided whether they wanted to leave or stay in the European Union. Okay, and Brexit, Britain exit, was the name of the kind of the combined term for the whole thing. And 52% of the country decided they wanted to leave the EU rather than stay. The EU is the European Union. It's a group of European countries who operate together with a shared ruling system and laws and deals in place that help them work together essentially. But UK no longer going to be part of that European Union, and that's going to have some serious repercussions for the Premier League. Now, this isn't going to be a political video. I'm not going to talk about whether I think it was a good or a bad thing that we're leaving the EU. I'm merely going to concentrate on the football. Now, the first thing to talk about is timescales, okay? This is not going to be an overnight process. It could take anything between 2 and 10 years for us actually to fully disengage from the European Union, okay? So we're not talking about something that's going to come into play for the next Premier League, probably, but these are significant changes. Now, prior to us leaving the EU, anyone from the EU was free to move in and out of European Union countries and work freely. So anyone that was from another country in the EU could come to the Premier League and play for a Premier League club, whether they're French, whether they're German, whatever. Instead, in the future, UK being out of the EU will mean that we have different rules in place. It will essentially mean that players from these European countries will be treated the same as players from non-EU countries, such as African players, South American players. And that's going to be where they're going to have to apply for a work permit in order to play in England. Now, these work permits are distributed based on the amount of international games a player has played for their country. They have to be able to prove they've played in something like 45 or 30% of their country's games. And it all depends actually on what country they come from. If they come from a top 10 country in the world in terms of their world rankings, they only have to have played a certain amount of games. I think it's 30% of the last year's internationals. If they come from a country that's outside the top 10, maybe between 11th and 20th place, they have to have played about 45% of that country's international games. So it's quite complicated. And what it would essentially mean is players who haven't played that many games for their country yet might not be able to come to the Premier League. For example, Dimitri Payet, when he came to West Ham, he hadn't played many games for France. He hadn't played a high enough percentage of their games in recent matches, so he wouldn't have been able to come to England. He wouldn't have got his work permit. Likewise, N'Golo Kante had a great season. He's playing for France now, but when Leicester bought him, he hadn't made an appearance for the French team. As a result, he wouldn't have been able to come to Leicester and wouldn't have had the season he's had at Leicester. Do these new rules mean those players have to go back? No. Players that are already here are more likely than not going to be able to stay and continue doing what they're doing. It's going to affect future transfers though. Just to put this into perspective, there was a study carried out last year that proved there was 332 European players currently playing in either the Premier League, Championship or Scottish Premiership that would not meet the new non-EU criteria. And as a result, they wouldn't have actually been able to come to their clubs in England or Scotland if those new rules were in place. So let's imagine the UK hadn't been in the EU for the last sort of 10, 20 years. Big players that would never have been able to come here. I've mentioned Payet and Kante already. Cristiano Ronaldo, Thierry Henry, Anthony Martial. None of these guys would have been able to join their clubs because they wouldn't have played enough games for their country at that point. However, one thing that's definitely worth pointing out is despite the fact that these rules will come into place if we do leave the EU, there's still a chance we could stay in the EU. There's still a chance there could be another referendum which would reverse all of this. There's also a chance that the UK or the Premier League could do specific trade deals with countries, for example, France, Germany, whoever, to say that we can take footballers that haven't played X amount of games still, and it would actually it would just go around the non-EU process. But anyway, the fact of the matter is the Premier League clubs have so much money thanks to TV deals that yes, they might not be able to go and buy these diamonds in the rough like Kante or these late bloomers like Payet, but they can just go and buy a proven international, with 40, 50 caps if they need to. They can splash the cash. Most importantly, it's going to cost them more money to get these sort of players now though, particularly because of the devaluing of the pound. Since we've announced that we voted to go out of the EU, the value of the pound has dropped significantly. An example of this is that West Ham recently bid 40 million euros for Batshuayi, the young Belgian striker at Marseille. Now, when the bid was actually made, that 40 million euros was valued at about 31 million pounds. However, because of the subsequent dramatic drop in the value of the pound, that 40 million euros is now worth 34 million pounds, which basically means from nothing, West Ham, if the deal happens, have lost £3 million. In the case of us leaving the EU, what we're more likely to see a lot less of is young European talents coming to academies. I'm talking about Fabregas when he came to Arsenal, Bellerin when he came to Arsenal, Januzaj, these sort of players that previously would have been allowed to move based on them being from an EU country and of a certain age between 16 and 18. You just won't be able to do those things anymore. Like Paul Pogba and PK coming to Man United before they moved on. None of these deals will happen. There is a bright side to all this though. The bright side is that the fact there will be less European players, or it will be harder or more expensive to get European players, should mean that English players or homegrown players get more time, which should subsequently allow for an improvement in the English national team. So some people will tell you the quality of the football in the Premier League might get worse and the spectacle of the Premier League might get worse, but the quality of the English national team could improve as a result. So I think ultimately the way someone might react to these changes in the Premier League is probably similar to how they would have reacted to Brexit in general. If you're someone that wanted us to leave the European Union, wanted the UK to become more of a UK nation, less European, less immigration, and more of a standalone country, you're probably the same sort of person that wants to see the English national team do better as well, because you're a proud patriot. And those things kind of go hand in hand a little bit. However, if you're more of a European sentimentality and you want to see more of a combined nationalism with other countries, and you want to see different nationalities coming to the country and playing their football, and, you know, in many cases showing the English how to do it, you're probably quite disappointed with the fact that we're leaving the EU, and you're probably not as concerned with the English national team. You care more about the Premier League in general, I'd say. So it depends what sort of person you are. For football fans, one thing that could become harder with the UK leaving the EU is actually travelling to away games for European destinations. For example, if you support a Champions League team, going to France, going to Germany, popping over on the plane won't be as easy. You might have to get a visa just to go to France, which is previously been such an easy process. That's all going to come down to how those individual countries react to us leaving the EU, and who knows, they might leave the EU as well. There's still lots to be figured out. One thing's for sure though, if it all goes ahead, once the time has passed, you know, whether it takes 2 or 10 years, there will be some significant changes to the Premier League as a result of us leaving the EU. So leave me a comment below with how you feel about these prospective changes. Are you someone that's happy to see the UK leave the EU and happy to see a chance for more English players in the Premier League and generally thinks that all these changes are a good thing? Or are you someone that thinks it's disappointing, we're going to see maybe less sort of diamond in the rough young European players come through and be discovered like Kante and Payet? We're going to see less top quality players perhaps because they're going to cost more money to get? I don't know. Where do you stand on these issues? Leave me a comment below. Drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe for more. I'll see you next time. Until then, don't go changing.